The story of Nancy and Bob Oden is one of those very special Aspen tales that seem to happen only in the rarefied air of this Rocky Mountain town. Although they both grew up in Chicago, they did not meet until they had followed their separate trails to Aspen.
I first came in 1947 because that was when Walter Pepke was running around Chicago trying to find people to come out to go skiing. So there was a whole bunch of us who would take the train out, and we'd always stay at the Jerome Hotel. We first came in 47 and came for quite a few years there afterwards on spring vacation. And then in 1964, I moved out here with my three oldest children and lived on my brother's ranch. And that was how I got here. And we have to wait 10 more days before I met Bob. So we can go back to when you moved here.
I moved here in 1957. I had been practicing in Chicago. I was overworked and wanted to get out of the big city. I was married to a guy named Joyce at the time, and we came out to Aspen, and she broke her ankle, and I asked who the orthopedic surgeon was at the old 1882 hospital. They didn't have any, so we decided to move here, and we did.
And everybody in Chicago told him he was crazy because how could you make a living going to some town that was not hardly existent? And of course that was true at that particular point.
But it was a great town. Dirt streets. Dr. Baxter and Dr. Barner were the doctors that were here at the time.
It's very important that people understand what he did for the community and medicine. He was the first trained orthopedist, he was first board-certified orthopedist here in a day when, we had Bugsy and Baxter, and who did a good job, by the way.
There was not a lot of office space available, and there was a building which is known as the Aspen Leaf Building, which is at 420 East Hyman Street, which was owned by Sandy Sanderson. And Sandy wanted another doctor in town, so he gave us free rent for the first 6 months in order to get another doctor in town. And that was one of the things that really made me move here.
I remember him always telling us when I'd gripe about having to take call that he provided orthopedic coverage for Vail and Rifle, Glenwood Springs, Eagle, as well as Aspen, so that kind of shut me up to when I would complain about having to be on call every third night.
By 1964, Bob, along with Dr. Witt and Virgil Gold, prepared to move into the new Aspen Clinic building on Main Street. The same year, Bob met Nancy at a picnic on her brother's ranch.
Our dates were spent that first winter with my driving in from Snowmass because Bob didn't have time to go back and forth, so I'd drive in. And then when he was free from the hospital, our big evening was spent going down to watch the building of the clinic to see whether the wiring was right and the plumbing was right. It wasn't exactly what you'd call romantic, I don't know.
Once they married 3 years later, Bob and Nancy became involved in the entire fabric of the Aspen community, living the kind of lives that Walter Pepke would have been proud of. They both have a way of communicating to people the joy of contributing to one's town.
He's one of the fathers of sports medicine in the country, and that is, sports medicine is a subspecialty of orthopedic surgery. And that before that, it was just kind of a poor son to the total joint surgeons, hand surgeons, and so forth. But I think he and several others of his era made it a respected and now one of the most popular of the subspecialties in orthopedics.
We did not invent the arthroscopic process, but certainly had a lot in the development of the arthroscopic process. Initially, the arthroscope was used just as a diagnostic tool.
He always had ideas, and his ideas about the hospital, very hospital-oriented, did a lot of good things for the hospital. Knew how to raise money. If he had a patient that happened to have money, he always got money. I mean, he's a professional.
Dr. Oden served 8 years on the hospital board, shepherding the construction of the new hospital on Castle Creek Road. He founded the Aspen and Snowmass Clinics, the Aspen Valley Medical Foundation, the EMT program, and donated Aspen's first air ambulance. Becoming the doctor of the U.S. ski team in 1960 brought together his love of ski racing, his medical experience, and his caring nature.
He was the first head physician for the U.S. ski team and started the program for physicians traveling with the ski team. His initial concept was to provide good medical coverage for the ski team, primarily while they were traveling in Europe.
For the Odanes, it was a natural progression to move from the race courses of Europe to a 16-year involvement with Aspen's World Cup. Ruth White suggested that Nancy serve as chief of protocol.
And the reason I think she felt that I was probably the only person who'd gone on the World Cup circuit and sort of knew the cast of characters who were involved and what it was like to try to get a credential, which sometimes was impossible and sometimes was very easy. The first year we started here, it was extremely easy because not any of us had a clue as to what we were doing.
Headquarters was at the old hospital, which is right next door to the Odanes' house. And it was just a disastrous World Cup, I guess. It was the first time with the FIS crew, you know, the Europeans all coming over here and demanding all sorts of privileges that we were unprepared for, apparently. And there were gale force winds, and the finish line was blown over. The timing cards that were all handheld in those days, you know, we didn't have everything all wired on the hill, were blown all over downtown Aspen. There was an error in how they calculated the timing. So the first day of training runs, I guess, was just a complete, pure, unmitigated disaster. And so finally, after putting all of the controversy to bed, everyone went to sleep at some wee small hour of the morning, and at the crack of dawn, there was Nancy with her mop and her bucket crossing the driveway on her way over to clean up headquarters so that it would all be ready for the new day of disaster, which would have been day 2 of the first World Cup. Typical. Nothing is beneath her. She'll do whatever it takes to make things work.
In the 1970s, Nancy began working with Fred Lane at the lemonade stand in front of the Aspen Music Festival tent. She's been chairman since 1973, a genius supervising 140 volunteers and countless muffins, cookies, coffee, and lemonade to nourish eager concert goers.
Or at least for me, it's my way of sort of giving back to the community for the fact that I have the privilege of living here. I mean, I think in any town, I don't care whether it's big or little or rich or poor, I think that if you don't have that volunteer aspect of at least a large section of the community, you don't have community.
76 trombones led the big parade, 210 cornets close in hand.
I think she began community theater when Herman Edel was producing a show. It was Music Man, I believe, and he needed a couple of $1,000. And he went to Nancy and he said, "Do you think you could get me a couple $1,000 in 2 days?" And she showed up the next, whenever he needed it, with $2,500, and that was the beginning. And now she literally raises thousands for Aspen Community Theater every single fall.
The thing I think is one of the fun things is to start from scratch. You know you're doing a show, and you go from the piece of paper, which is the script, and a bare stage with no actors, to putting this whole thing together in a relatively short period of time, 6 to 7, maybe at the most, 8 weeks, including audition time.
General Cartwright! Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, Arthur.
Good morning, General Cartwright.
General, we didn't know you were coming to town. Just got in early this morning.
Of course, volunteering tends to obliterate all the details of one's life, and some things are bound to get lost, like dinner. Just ask Bob.
And Nancy would come home late at night, and he sort of decided the best thing for him to do was to get involved himself. So he started helping us with sets and getting very involved as well.
Outside of orthopedics, and despite his full-time commitment to this, he somehow always managed to find time and to give and make a major commitment to the city of Aspen and the people of Pitt County. And I've been involved with him in some airport dealings. He's volunteered an incredible amount of time, both to the hospital board, to employee housing, open space, and you name it. I wish I had 1/10 of his energy.
I remember going to a couple of meetings and seeing government trying to do something, and realized that private enterprise could do it so much easier. And met an individual at that point by the name of Mr. Harry Truscott, and he felt the same way I did. So we started the nonprofit corporation known as Aspen Pitkin Employee Housing. If you shorten that up, it's APE Housing. And we went to the county with our idea of if they will lease us the land, we'll build a building. We'll sell bonds, and the rent will be enough just to pay off the bonds, which will be low-cost housing. And we built Hunter Longhouse with that, and then Truscott Place, and 3 or 4 other projects.
He's often been an unsung hero because a lot of his work is behind the scenes and in committees and so forth. He's never been one to adore or to even enjoy the limelight, and I really respect him for that.
In the earlier days of Aspen before the gondola, it was always kind of fun to go up the lifts because it was more a socialized type of sport than it is now, talking and meeting people from across the country as well as across the world. And they ask, well, what does your dad do here in town? I go, well, he's an orthopedic surgeon. And I sometimes would preface, or they would preface, well, I'd rather get to know him socially than on a professional basis. And I said, either way, he's a great man.
Yeah, I'm very proud of them. They've done so much for me and for the rest of this town. It was about time that everyone's going to really know everything that they have done.
Without question, Bob and Nancy are the quintessential mom and pop, taking under their wings just about anyone they've ever met, fixing broken bones and then keeping in touch for the rest of their lives. With uncommon vision, enthusiasm, sincerity, and tremendous goodwill, they're part of Aspen's backbone, people who enable this town to stand as tall as the surrounding mountains.